At the Democratic National Convention, Senator Bernie Sanders made the case for Joe Biden. Now, let me say, this is one of the best pitches I've seen in favor of Joe Biden because, in general, got to be honest, Democratic Party is kind of a corporatist party in many senses with many of the actual politicians. So sometimes the message can get lost, but the point is that Sanders is saying that Joe Biden is a significantly better choice than Donald Trump. Now, in my own words, I would say you don't have to be excited about Joe. You just have to want to move in the right direction of making progress. Because in our political system, we have two choices, and you have to choose the less bad choice. Anyway, Senator Sanders' endorsement of Joe is quite glowing and rather convincing. So I'm going to go through a summary of it. And I have a lot of points here, but then it's because it's a 9 minute, just under 9 minute speech. But so this is an unprecedented moment, Sanders says, and it's the worst public health crisis and economic crisis in a long time. And meanwhile, we have a systemic racism problem, and we have climate change going on. And in the midst of all of our issues, we have a president that is not helping and is in fact leading us towards authoritarianism, which is strict obedience to the government. So in that case, because of that direction that he's taking us, this is the most important election in recent history, and it needs an unprecedented response. So Sanders says we must fight greed, oligarchy, and bigotry. So he frequently talks about oligarchy. He says we need Joe Biden. So he speaks directly to his supporters, and he says, thank you. We've moved the country in a new direction. And all of us yearn for a nation based on principles of justice, love, and compassion. And despite his campaign ending some time ago, the progressive movement that he has inspired continues. And some progressive ideas, which were once radical, are going mainstream. So he says step one to moving towards making things better in this way, he says we cannot reelect Trump. We must prevent the reelection. And we cannot normalize the things that he's done. So some of the things he's done, which are egregiously bad, are prevent voting, undermine the United States Postal Service, deploy the military against peaceful protesters, threaten to delay the election, and threaten to not leave office if losing. And so these things are fundamentally un-American and undemocratic. He specifically didn't say un-American, though, or undemocratic. Those are my words in this case. But I think that is kind of the vibe it's going in. So he says we should not normalize this. We will work with progressives, moderates, and conservatives to preserve democracy. So in this way, he's saying he'll work with anybody that wants to preserve democracy at this moment. So in this case, he's happy to work with Republicans. He's happy to work with, never Trumpers. I assume the Lincoln Project he's happy to work with. Everybody who has a common goal to get rid of Trump, he's happy to work with. So that seems reasonable. He says that President Trump has attacked doctors and put people's health at risk in this pandemic. And meanwhile, he's refused to mobilize the federal government to address, masks or shortages, to address testing and everything for the pandemic. And he compared Trump to Nero and Rome. So he said Trump golfed while the U.S. burnt. And all of these things have caused the economic crisis to be exacerbated. We have lost jobs and lost health insurance for many, many people. And the way that Trump tried to address this is he used a bunch of fraudulent executive orders that in practice don't really do anything. So they're just kind of nice pieces of paper. But if you go about trying to make change in this way, you can, send an executive order that fundamentally doesn't do anything. You can just have it say something that either is not enforceable or something like that already is going on or whatever. So like just throwing a random executive order, it has to actually be something that can be implemented. So he's saying that's not effective. He says that a lot of people are stuck on the economic treadmill of no hope of ever getting ahead. And he says that we need an equitable, compassionate, and inclusive solution led by Joe Biden. So He mentioned all the reasons why Trump is bad. He tried to talk about the ways in which he, Senator Bernie Sanders, agrees with Joe Biden to show the common ground, and that is his pitch for why Biden is a better candidate. So he says Joe supports raising the minimum wage to $15. He supports easier access for workers to join unions, paid family leave, a universal pre-K. He wants to make childcare affordable, rebuild infrastructure, fight climate change through clean electricity, expand healthcare and cut costs of prescription drugs, lower Medicare eligibility from 65 to 60, end private prisons, end cash bail, and the school to prison pipeline, and heal the soul of divisive rhetoric in a divided nation, and stop the demonization of immigrants and other hatred. So that was his pitch for what he agrees with Biden on, and that was in their plan that they put together. And what is left off was Medicare for all, obviously, which is one of Bernie's big policies. But he said that basically, compared to Trump's plan, obviously anything that expands healthcare and cuts cost of prescription drugs is better. So, I mean, can't argue with that too much when you're only given two choices between Trump or Biden. So let's actually take a listen to the speech. And since I gave my whole spiel now at the beginning, I'm just going to let the video play through.
Good evening. Our great nation is now living in an unprecedented moment. We're facing the worst public health crisis in 100 years and the worst economic collapse since the Great Depression. We are confronting systemic racism and the enormous threat to our planet of climate change. And in the midst of all of this, we have a president who is not only incapable of addressing these crises, but is leading us down the path of authoritarianism. This election is the most important in the modern history of this country. In response to the unprecedented crises we face, we need an unprecedented response, a movement like never before of people who are prepared to stand up and fight for democracy and decency and against greed, oligarchy, and bigotry. And we need Joe Biden as our next president. Let me take this opportunity to say a word to the millions of people who supported my campaign this year and in 2016. My friends, thank you for your trust, your support, and the love you showed Jane, me, and our family. Together, we have moved this country in a bold new direction, showing that all of us, black and white, Latino, Native American, Asian American, gay and straight, native-born and immigrant, yearn for a nation based on the principles of justice, love, and compassion. Our campaign ended several months ago, but our movement continues and is getting stronger every day. Many of the ideas we fought for that just a few years ago were considered radical are now mainstream. But let us be clear, if Donald Trump is reelected, all the progress we have made will be in jeopardy. At its most basic, this election is about preserving our democracy. During this president's term, the unthinkable has become normal. He has tried to prevent people from voting, undermined the U.S. Postal Service, deployed the military and federal agents against peaceful protesters, threatened to delay the election, and suggested that he will not leave office if he loses. This is not normal, and we must never treat it like it is. Under this administration, authoritarianism has taken root in our country. I and my family, and many of yours, know the insidious way authoritarianism destroys democracy, decency, and humanity. As long as I am here, I will work with progressives, with moderates, and yes, with conservatives to preserve this nation from a threat that so many of our heroes fought and died to defeat. This president is not just a threat to our democracy, but by rejecting science, he has put our lives and health in jeopardy. Trump has attacked doctors and scientists trying to protect us from the pandemic, while refusing to take strong action to produce the masks, gowns, and gloves our healthcare workers desperately need. Nero fiddled while Rome burned. Trump golfs. His actions fanned this pandemic, resulting in over 170,000 deaths and a nation still unprepared to protect its people. Furthermore, Trump's negligence has exacerbated the economic crisis we are now experiencing. Since this pandemic began, over 30 million people have lost their jobs, and many have lost their health insurance. Millions of working families are wondering how they will feed their kids, and they're worried that they will be evicted from their homes. And how has Trump responded? Instead of maintaining the $600 a week unemployment supplement that workers were receiving and the $1,200 emergency checks that many of you received, instead of helping small businesses, Trump concocted fraudulent executive orders that do virtually nothing to address the crisis while threatening the very future of Social Security and Medicare. But the truth is that even before Trump's negligent response to this pandemic, too many hardworking families have been caught on an economic treadmill with no hope of ever getting ahead. Together, we must build a nation that is more equitable, more compassionate, and more inclusive. I know that Joe Biden will begin that fight on day one. Let me offer you just a few examples of how Joe will move us forward. Joe supports raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. This will give 40 million workers a pay raise and push the wage scale up for everyone else. Joe will also make it easier for workers to join unions, create 12 weeks of paid family leave, fund universal pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds, and make child care affordable for millions of families. Joe will rebuild our crumbling infrastructure and fight the threat of climate change by transitioning us to 100% clean electricity over the next 15 years. These initiatives will create millions of good-paying jobs all across our country. As you know, we are the only industrialized nation not to guarantee health care for all people. While Joe and I disagree on the best path to get universal coverage, he has a plan that will greatly expand health care and cut the cost of prescription drugs. Further, he will lower the eligibility age of Medicare from 65 down to 60. To help reform our broken criminal justice system, Joe will end private prisons and detention centers, cash bail, and the school-to-prison pipeline. And to heal the soul of our nation, Joe Biden will end the hate and division Trump has created. He will stop the demonization of immigrants, the coddling of white nationalists, the racist dog whistling, the religious bigotry, and the ugly attacks on women. My friends, I say to you, to everyone who supported other candidates in the primary, and to those who may have voted for Donald Trump in the last election, the future of our democracy is at stake. The future of our economy is at stake. The future of our planet is at stake. We must come together, defeat Donald Trump, and elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as our next president and vice president. My friends, The price of failure is just too great to imagine. Thank you.
During the clapping, a little awkward here. It looks like some videos are delayed, I hope, and they're not just like not clapping. I think probably their video feed is delayed. But so there you have it. The case from Senator Bernie Sanders to vote Joe Biden.